the city of St. Louis, you're listening to the Don't Push Pause podcast with your hosts, Justin Johnson and Lindsay Reber.
Welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, Justin.
Hey, Lindsay.
What are we doing this week?
Today we're doing Deliverance.
Man, 1972.
Yeah.
Is it the oldest movie we've done?
Yeah, I believe it is. I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh, yeah.
74 or so. Yeah.
But for this being 1972, man, this movie does not look dated.
No, not at all. If anything, this movie, I think, because it's free of any sort of digital effects or anything, early digital effects or gimmickry, it really holds up. This is a lean movie. I really...
That's a good word to describe it.
And this was your suggestion, which it's a movie that didn't really pop in my mind, but as soon as you threw it out there with a couple of the titles, it just kept kind of sinking in my head like, man, it's a really great film all around.
I love adventure. I love a good adventure movie. And a lot of those stem out of the 70s and 80s. And I think with this one, the cast is so solid. The story is simple. Who doesn't love a good, what would you do if this terrible thing happened? Like, how would you behave?
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
it's a age-old type of story. But I think one thing with Deliverance that's always kind of bothered me is that it's really, if you bring up Deliverance, people think of the infamous squeal like a pig rape scene, which is very important to the story. Is the catalyst that sets everything in motion. But it's always, I don't know, it's always just kind of irked me a little bit.
It sort of almost like casts a shadow over the film where it's like, it's that scene is so notorious. Like people, it's easy to forget how great this film is, like, and how great the performances are and the story and the craft that's here. So I think one of the things we'll hopefully in this episode we'll kind of debunk some of that kind of, I mean, we'll talk about that scene but we really want to talk about other aspects of this movie that really make this a worthwhile watch, even if you feel a little apprehensive about revisiting that particular scene.
And with that infamous rape scene, we're gonna also talk about it from a few different angles than just what's on the surface too, because it's kind of interesting to think about that scene a little bit deper than what I think people normally do.
Rewatching the movie, it hit me right away. Like, there's a lot here to unravel that we could discuss.
So of course we'll talk about that. We'll talk about themes, the cast. It's pretty important. John Boorman, who's the director, and James Dickey, who wrote the novel Deliverance and the screenplay as well. And
his only screenplay, his only novel.
Yeah. Quirky guy, James Dickey. And
this was one of those kind of troubled productions. There's a lot of difficulty and danger in filming this movie, and all shot on location, which is, it wasn't unorthodox for the 70s, but to travel so far away from Los Angeles was a little against the grain, I guess you would say.
Yeah, definitely not typical. And digital special effects weren't a thing then, so they had to make a lot of things work. And there are some really good kind of effects that happen. I'm thinking specifically of Ronny Cox's arm. We'll get there.
That, yeah. And certainly talk about the cast.
Yeah.
And this being a first film for two of the actors, and then certainly I would say one of the most memorable roles that Burt Reynolds has done in his career.
And I think he, at least until very late into his career, was saying that this is the best film he's ever done.
Yeah.
And gave him some clout.
So yeah, lot to unpack, a lot to talk about with Deliverance. I'm looking forward to this. After our discussion, we'll do our picks of the week. This week I went with John Boorman's feature that he did directly after Deliverance, 2 years later.
I can't wait to hear about it.
Wacky movie, Zardoz.
And what a name.
Yeah.
God, I can't wait. I can't wait to see this. Thank you for letting me borrow that.
I'll explain the name in my review. And what was your pick of the week?
Mine was a Burt Reynolds vehicle, a little musical comedy called The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas.
Such a name. I mean, even when I was younger, I remember that title.
Yeah.
It's like at the video store.
Yeah. It's funny that title made it. Mm-hmm. There was some, I think some TV, when it aired on TV, maybe once a long time ago, I can't remember, but at one point or another, it was called The Best Little Cat House in Texas.
Yeah, that just doesn't have the same.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Yeah.
No.
Well, we'll, as always, round out things with our Murray moments. But before we get into our first clip from this film, can you just give us a brief rundown of what we're in for? What's this movie about?
All right. So the story of Deliverance is 4 friends decide to go on this canoeing trip down the Kalhilawasi, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, the Kalhilawasi River, before it is destroyed and dammed up and turned into a lake. It's considered like one of the most dangerous rivers in the country, and they're setting out to kind of conquer it before it doesn't exist anymore. So they set out on this trip and run into some trouble when they meet up with some folks that live in the area, and then it becomes not only about the interaction that happens with those guys, but also surviving the rest of the way down the river.
Very much a movie about survival.
Yeah.
And self-preservation.
Yeah. It's very primal.
Yeah.
This movie.
We'll go to a clip from Deliverance, and we'll come back and start talking about it.
We take this man down out of the mountains and turn him over to the sheriff. There's going to be a trial, all right. Trial by jury.
So what?
We killed the man, Drew. Shot him in the back. A mountain man. Cracker. It gives us something to consider.
All right. Consider, we're listening.
Shit, all these people are related. Be goddamned if I want to come back up here and stand trial with this man's aunt and his uncle. Maybe his mama and his daddy sitting in the jury box. What do you think, Bobby? How about you, Ed?
I don't know. I really don't know. Now, you listen, Lewis. I don't know what you got in mind. But if you try to conceal this body, you're setting yourself up for a murder charge. Now, that much law I do know. This ain't one of your fucking games! You killed somebody! There he is!
I see him, Drew. That's right, I killed somebody. But you're wrong if you don't see this as a game.
Lewis!
Are you listening, Ed? Damn it, we can get out of this thing without any questions asked. We get connected up with that body and the law. This thing's gonna be hanging over us the rest of our lives. We gotta get rid of that guy.
Just how are you gonna do that, Lewis? Where?
Anywhere. Everywhere. Nowhere.
So, just right out of the gate, let's just say the title of this movie alone was very 70s.
It's vague.
Very vague. Deliverance. You know, in the 80s, they've just had so many movies where it was just like, whatever the main thing of the movie is.
Predator.
Right. You know, or E.T., you know, it's like Conan, you know, like that's what the title's going to be. But
Beastmaster.
The 70s had a lot of, like, you know, 5 Easy Pieces, like just strange, you know, Apocalypse Now, like just things that didn't really clue you into if you saw the title, like, what is this movie about? Yeah. So I think that's a good place to start because there is, but I do think it's a good title, and I think it does.
It makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that this movie is very thematic.
Yeah.
It's not, it's a very straightforward, simple story, but there are a lot of, themes and idealisms that I think are pretty strongly stated in the movie. I mean, even just from the opening title sequence with the crossover voices of the discussion of the four characters who are going to go out to conquer this river, like before it becomes a lake, like they're leaving their Atlanta city homes and going to the middle, rural country to battle this river.
In essence, like, by going to the wilderness to conquer this river, they're being delivered from their normal, everyday, run-of-the-mill, just kind of grind. In doing that, in disappearing and going back to this kind of like primal instinct, they also become very vulnerable.
Yeah, from the get-go, this very much was like one of the earliest movies, at least that I can remember. I mean, certainly 80s, 90s onward, there were movies about people who live in the suburbs and they're very bored. They've become so comfortable in life. But this was early enough on to where that wasn't like such an idealism in America. I think, we were, it was very much up until post World War II. The main story you always read about is like people were scrapping for survival. It was about feeding your kids and the idea of like, we're going to go on a canoe trip or we're going to take a vacation. That just wasn't something that normal people did. That wasn't like part of everyday life. It was like, we're gonna stop. We got to get away from our normal, comfortable lives of like, going to the grocery store and mowing our lawns. That just didn't, exist. It was all about like making sure like you got through the day. Even in post Great Depression. But this was enough. I think was enough of the generation that's like 20 years removed from World War II and the baby boomers, building families, living comfortably, and technology, all these comforts in your home, like dishwashers. And I think this was like one of those first movies that showed that sort of like need to like challenge, doing something that most people would avoid. And I think it's funny because they go to a place where people are living who don't have any of the have never seen any of the luxuries,
the trappings that niceties that they have, and to them, trying to go out on a dangerous river seems like about the stupidest thing that you can do. Yeah, though, like with Deliverance, I've known this movie since I was really young, but I also grew up in rural Missouri, like southern Missouri, and my dad, would go on trips to Canada for like weeks at a time. And, probably didn't have anything like Deliverance happen to him, but was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. I'm also not saying that my dad is like the Burt Reynolds character, but maybe a little bit. But if you're that type of person that still has something within you that's, wanting to kind of remember or just get away from stuff, you still have some sense of like not being completely absorbed by this mold that you're supposed to fit into. This movie is a really great example of that. And even the part where Burt Reynolds is kind of not confronting Jon Voight's character, Jon Voight's like the quintessential city boy type of thing. And while he's enjoying this time on the river, he's still that kind of city boy. And Burt Reynolds is kind of saying, why do you come out here with me on these adventures? What is it? You gotta, what is it about it? You got a nice wife, got a job, but why you keep coming out here with me? Kind of saying there's something within you that's like me that wants to leave all that behind for a second.
Well, and I really love the way the aggressiveness of Burt Reynolds' character really shows where the other characters are coming from. And you get that early on in the movie where Burt Reynolds, this is what he lives for. The other guys, this is like more of an adventure, more like, we're going to beat this river. And Burt Reynolds is more like, you can't beat the river. Like, we're out here, like, this is like a survivalist thing. You need to think like a survivalist.
It should be said, too, real quickly. I know I already said it's for friends, but just to give you a quick setup, Burt Reynolds, we kind of get the idea that Burt Reynolds is like the star and like the main person of this story. He's very much what looks like the leader of the pack, like the man's man, the outdoorsy guy, but who we kind of come to find out is who becomes the leader is the Jon Voight character, who is Ed, and he's the city boy, kind of the, I don't want to say yes man, but he's kind of Burt Reynolds' like little sidekick kind of. Then we also have Ned Beatty, who plays Bobby. What would you say about him? He's just very much kind of like, he probably got beat up in high school a lot. He's just kind of, he talks a big game, but it's probably because he's very insecure as a man.
Yeah, he's just kind of a goofy guy.
Kind of a goofball.
Yeah, he's kind of a goofball, yeah.
And then rounding out is Ronny Cox, who's Drew. Ronny Cox, such a sweetheart in this movie. He's like the straightforward, good, just a good-hearted man that's along for this trip.
And this is not to say that these characters are like so one-dimensional.
No,
everyone has that's just to give you the setup.
Give you setup on
everybody has their moment where they shine, and there's depth. They're not just this one,
I mean, this movie is basically these four guys. So they have, there's significance to all of their characters, but just to give you just a quick little snippet on who they are.
I think it very much is interesting because you get this early, this movie is 47 years old, but
that's crazy.
This sort of masculinity, the idea of what a man's supposed to be, or toxic masculinity that you hear about, that people write articles about now. 47 years ago, Burt Reynolds was like that guy who's like pushing these guys to the point where they're not even having a good time. I mean, like the next morning, Ned Beatty's just like, I don't want to ride in a canoe with him. He's like yelling at me, and I don't like being yelled at. And they're, and Burt Reynolds is kind of pushing them like, you guys aren't men, you're just a bunch of wimps out here, and you're going to get yourself hurt. But
there's no shaming or anything like that Burt Reynolds is doing, but he's definitely pushing their buttons.
Yeah, but it's in a way, I think, and I like the way that it's portrayed because it isn't so straightforward, and he does have this sort of like weird resentment toward them, and even when they're all enjoying like playing music, Ronny Cox is playing the guitar, and Ned Beatty's passing around the whiskey, and he goes over to hand the whiskey to Burt Reynolds. Burt Reynolds kind of like turns his head to the side, but I find it interesting.
He doesn't drink.
I find it very interesting. He's not a non-drinker, and also like none of these guys are smoking cigarettes. This is a very like 70s were very much like drinking, smoking. 60s,
Jon Voight's
70s.
got a very
he's got a pipe. Yeah, he's got the pipe. But it is interesting to me. It's like you're able to like sort of identify with the characters, and much like the way Stand By Me did, we talked about.
It is very much like that.
You've got the strong character, the person that's like the voice of reason. Ned Beatty's like the Vern character. By their first opening conversation, you get the sense of like where they fall in this structure because it's four guys that have to tackle something, and this where they're at. It's like fight for survival. It's like survival of the fittest, and so it's like. You see where they're stacking up and how they look at each other, who can help us the most type.
And I think also by having characters like this, you can very easily identify with one, if not all of them, or see some part of yourself in them as well. I think that's kind of how it was for James Dickey, the writer, too.
And I think like the themes, like going into themes like very much like a man versus himself, man versus nature, and this sort of idea of like the only thing stronger than man is like nature, and this also idea of
you're at the mercy of nature.
Yeah, and I think too, like we said, this theme of like fight for survival. This very much is like I think like a survivalist movie. I think that's why we'll get into like the infamous rape scene in the next discussion, but I think ultimately what that scene really
it's about male dominance, but also what happens.
But I think what that scene has really done, that a disservice this movie is really shown what a great survivalist like adventure film this is.
Oh, yeah.
I think that scene sort of overshadows like how much this movie is about these guys working as a team, even through the adversity of like trying to cover up their crime of murder, and having this like huge discussion of after they kill the rapist, each person has their own take on what they should do. Ronny Cox being like strongly against them like covering up, this crime. So before we go to the next clip, I wanted to just briefly talk about James Dickey because he's the reason why this whole movie got going. And James Dickey was very much like the Southern man, was a poet, but also he had this like strange balance of like, he's this like poet, but then he's like this sort of like gruff, like a good old boy. This was his only novel that he had written. He adapted it because I think it's perfect. I mean, I think a lot of times when a book comes out that, they get Hollywood writers to make the movie more Hollywood. And I thought that it was such a perfect thing to not do that to this movie because this movie does not feel Hollywoodized.
No.
This feels very raw and authentic. And I think it was a perfect move to bring the guy who wrote the novel to adapt the screenplay. I know that John Boorman made some suggestions that they did use because in the novel, it opens with them in their homes in Atlanta, and it kind of shows how they have these sort of softer lives, like that they're not these rugged men. They, live in homes and they have jobs in the city and spouses and whatnot. And John Boorman wanted to cut that from the movie. He wanted to just do that quick voiceover and then cut it because it's all about them being out here.
And I get why that works in a novel, but
yeah. Because I think you get in the movie, there's enough information that we don't need to see them from that far.
It's a really boring way to start a movie like this.
But for the most part, though, the movie, from what I've read, is pretty close to the novel. But they did have James Dickey on location for a good first portion. And then he, I think, like sort of almost immediately started getting on the actor's nerves, and
he was asked to leave.
He was asked to leave and didn't really get along. But they had actually already cast him as the sheriff, and so just a fun fact: if you don't know, the sheriff at the end of the movie is the writer James Dickey. But he did come back to do that part, but they had asked him to leave the.
Well, he kept referring to the actors by their character names, and Burt Reynolds did not take kindly to that. And he was very overbearing. He was kind of getting in the way of rehearsals, it sounded like.
And sounded like he was kind of like a fibber, like he had kind of secretly told everybody, the cast and crew, that everything that happened in the book happened to him.
Everything happened in this book.
Yeah, but then John Boorman said that as soon as they got out, because John Boorman said he was a fairly skilled canoeer. Like he was familiar with canoeing, and he said as soon as he got out in the river with James Dickey, it was apparent to John Boorman that James Dickey had like spent zero time in a canoe and did not know how to navigate a river. But he did say that he had more respect for him after that, because John Boorman thought who could write something so authentic and real, not having experienced any of this, was a much more skilled writer. And so he kind of liked that about him, even though it annoyed him that he was going around telling all these tall tales on set.
James Dickey's kid even said that his dad liked making people think things about him that maybe had a kernel of truth, but he said he liked making up stories.
He sounded like he'd be a pretty rough person to spend an afternoon with.
Yes.
Not somebody you'd want to be in like a car ride with or anything.
I think gruff is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
The what did he say? The interaction with Burt Reynolds at the premiere of Deliverance is pretty funny to me, and like, indicator of what kind of a guy he was.
Like an interviewer asked, I guess like word got around that James Dickey and particularly Burt Reynolds did not get along, and some interviewer at the premiere asked them about that when they're standing together. Yes, Burt Reynolds, like, we heard you guys didn't get along on the set. What do you think of James Dickey? He's like, I think he's one of America's, best poets. And then the interviewer said, what do you think about that, James Dickey? And what was his response?
He said something like, I'm not very sure how many poets Mr. Reynolds has read before.
He sounded like he was a gruff guy, but nonetheless, I think he did a great job of like adapting his own novel. There's so many movies that you can hear like, you got to read the book. The movie adaptation's terrible. And it's because they did all these things and cut everything to make it more of like an easily accessible Hollywood film. And I think this movie certainly wasn't going for something that was like easily accessible. And we'll talk more of that when we come back from the second clip. We'll talk about the behind the scenes, because this was a very low budget film and there was a lot of stuff that happened that they kind of had to make concessions so they could make this movie happen, which I think is why it feels very non-Hollywood. And then we'll also talk about the cast briefly and the notorious rape scene. So go to the second clip. We'll come back. We'll talk about that.
Before you go, buddy, let me ask you something.
How come y'all end up with full life jackets?
Didn't we have an extra one?
No. Drew wasn't wearing his.
Well, how come he wasn't wearing it?
I don't know.
Don't ever do nothing like this again. Don't come back up here.
You don't have to worry about that, Sheriff.
I'd kind of like to see this town die peaceful.
I hope Deputy Queen finds his brother-in-law.
Oh, he'll come in drunk, probably.
So you talked a little bit about the characters of Deliverance, but wanted to briefly talk about the actors that portrayed those characters.
Yeah.
Because there's some interesting tidbits there. Those actors being Burt Reynolds, Ned Beatty, Jon Voight, and Ronny Cox.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the first film feature debut of Ned Beatty and Ronny Cox, both turning in, I think, really, subtle performances. And like we said before, each actor having their moment to shine in this movie. Their characters being pushed to their limits, and having that moment where they have to deal with the horrible things that are going on so that they can kind of not only survive the incident, but also live with themselves.
Yeah, they're so incredible. They both have very emotional moments in this movie. And yeah, their performances for this being their first movie, it's pretty astonishing.
John Boorman said that, which I think is a great scene at the very end where Jon Voight breaks down after, they get back and they're eating dinner and they're back in civilization. And Jon Voight kind of breaks down at the kindness of the strangers. And Ned Beatty sort of like breaks the tension because Ned Beatty's already dealt with humiliation. So he doesn't want John, there's that moment, there's almost like a look of like, it's humiliating to cry in front of somebody. So John Boorman said that Ned Beatty ad-libbed the line, "This is some good corn," but it was like a perfect, and the look on his face, the way his acting in that is like perfect. And it really breaks, you really feel like a tension's been broken, and it feels very close to real life.
He really does. That scene in particular, it feels so real, and also playing into the fact that Ned Beatty's character is, he says after he's raped earlier in the movie, saying, "I just want to put this behind us. I just don't want this getting around." Like, he wants to move away from this. He wants to forget it ever happened. And yeah, that's quite an emotional scene, especially for Jon Voight.
Yeah, and him saying,
for both of them, really.
He's saying to Jon Voight after they've kind of gotten away with murder, like, I probably won't be seeing you for a good while.
Yeah,
Ned Beatty's sort of like, I'm gonna go off and pretend that I never knew any of you guys and that none of this ever happened.
But it's also saying, "Hi, I'm really affected by what's happened."
Yeah, exactly.
but by completely trying to not deal with it.
And I think Ronny Cox is great because Ronny Cox, I think, is immediately captivating with the dueling banjos scene, which is, the other,
infamous
scene. But also being that, probably the most liberal of the bunch, the one that has the most, I think, like, ethical hold of like what's right and what's wrong and like what justice is, and
peacemaker,
and kind of really gives like a riveting and raw declaration there after the murder of the rapist of, we should go to the police, and this is, and kind of letting each character know, like, we have to live with this. This isn't like this like one and done kind of thing. Like, this is going to be like, we're going to take this with us for like, we're always going to think about this.
Do you, Justin, at all get teary-eyed at any moment in this movie? Because it happens a few times for me, and it's because it's so emotional. And one of those scenes is after the the build-up during the rape scene is really awful and humiliating. But after that, and Ronny Cox is like, "What are you doing? Think about what's going to happen. Like, we can't just pretend like this didn't happen and bury this guy." I like get emotionally affected by that scene.
Yeah, this isn't necessarily a real emotional movie for me,
really?
Personally,
Okay.
but I mean, there are two particular scenes, I mean, that I feel like the most emotionally connected to are them when they're sort of like right before Ronny Cox gets killed, and they've now decided, they're not going to take his body back. He's their friend. They're going to tie stones around him and sink him in the river because they just want to wrap up every loose end that has to, so they can save themselves. And, his arm's kind of like broken and hooked over his head, and, they're like talking about his life and basically doing these sort of like burial ritual that you would do, except for they're about to like sink him in the river. And that's really, it's real. That scene to me kind of gets me. And then also the Jon Voight kind of breaking down scene where they're at the dinner table toward the end there.
That's the other one for me too. Little fun fact quick about Ronny Cox and that broken arm is that Ronny Cox, the actor, was double jointed in his shoulder, so that could have been a fake arm, or maybe nowadays it would have been some CGI move. That was actually Ronny Cox's arm. It was a fun little trick he could do.
Yeah, and this is a movie too where it's like you kind of forget how really brutal like bone breaks are, and there's like two, that his broken arm kind of gangly over
gnarly.
His neck, and then
it's really gnarly
and then the
looking
broken protruding bone in Burt Reynolds' leg, and
so
just
gross.
Him like hitting it against the rocks. Just there's pretty visceral.
Also, with all of these actors, there's only one scene where there was a stuntman used, and it was when both canoes, right after the rape, murder, awful, terrible scene. And Ronny Cox, it's kind of ambiguous, but he goes overboard in one of the canoes, and then just kind of all hell breaks loose, and all the guys get thrown from their canoes. In that scene, which is pretty intense, there's only one stuntman used for one shot for Jon Voight, but otherwise everybody, I mean, because how else are you gonna? You can't reshoot something like this. It's happening in a wild, real river. It's got to be the actors.
Yeah, and that sort of like parlay into how dangerous of a film shoot this was. Mm-hmm. Kind of like these four actors got the movie based on the fact that they would do their own stunts without being insured. And there's even like a reference to like no insurance that Burt Reynolds jokes about earlier in the movie.
And Burt Reynolds and Jon Voight were, well-known actors at this point too, not like Ronny Cox and Ned Beatty, who were theater actors, but still they had careers, and they were kind of
Jon Voight was coming off of a Best Picture
Midnight Cowboy. Yeah, like they had something to lose if they got injured in this, but the stunt work is really impressive.
It's a very dangerous river. Like I read that like multiple people after the success of the movie had went to the river and drowned trying to canoe the river. Yeah. And people that have asked John Boorman about, do you feel guilty or strange about that? And he said, I don't know that I could make it look any more dangerous in the movie. Yeah. But John Boorman did say that before the actors did it, he canoed the river himself because he didn't want them to do anything dangerous that he wouldn't do himself. But he said that those scenes were a lot of the intense scenes where they're in the rapids. It was just John Boorman, the cinematographer, and like I think one camera assistant, because they couldn't. It was too dangerous to get a crew down in there, and there wasn't enough room. But he did do a lot of stuff in one shot, but he did do some coverage. And again, like it's pretty amazing when you watch the movie, the craft of it and the stunts, that knowing that those are all the same actors, and Jon Voight climbing up on that cliff is like insane, and I mean, granted, they cheat some of it the way they shoot it, but it's pretty intense
still, though. So there is a cliff climbing scene, and this is when, after the wreck, Burt Reynolds' leg is broken and Ronny Cox, we're assuming, has drowned, and they think that one of the mountain men that attacked them is kind of like up on this cliff kind of hunting them. So Jon Voight has to scale this cliff, and man, I just can't believe. I mean, I know that he's like strapped in and has a harness, and for all intents and purposes, like he is safe if he falls, but still, he climbed that thing by himself. And they did it in sections, of course, filming. It is still a movie, but man.
But yeah, I mean,
it's really cool.
And John Boorman said, like, the actors were dedicated. Like, nobody backed down from any challenge. Like, and he kind of told them this is going to be rough. And he even said that when he was picking the crew and the cinematographer, like, he specifically chose people that, you know, had a history of, like, working on not, you know, rough conditions, because he knew that once they all got out there, he didn't want people to start complaining and freaking out.
He also said that there were a few times where the actors didn't want to talk to him.
Yeah, I think Jon Voight, I think the most quotable line from John Boorman was that Jon Voight said,
You saved me.
You saved my career by putting in this movie, but then you tried to kill me in the river.
Yeah.
And so just a quick thing, speaking of John Boorman, you know, had already kind of started establish his career. He had hit with Point Blank with Lee Marvin, but this movie was very low budget. It was like $2 million. He kind of got a deal on Burt Reynolds and Jon Voight because they hadn't really had like a hit, or they weren't hot at the moment. He was a very crafty director. I think like certainly after Deliverance, he was a more bankable director, so he was able to get movies a little bit bigger budgets, but this was very much a low budget film and he shot it like a low budget film. But one thing that he said that I thought was pretty interesting on his style of directing is that he would do very low shooting ratios. And if you're unfamiliar, shooting ratio is basically how many takes per scene that they're going to do. So if a director does like 15 takes or 12 takes, at the end of the shoot, they sort of average like 10 takes per one scene. Was like 10-to-1 ratio. Yeah. Well, he said his average was around 3-to-1. So he usually, 1 out of every 3 takes is the take that would end up in the movie. But he said at one point in time at the studio, he had the lowest shooting ratio of any director. And he said the reason he specifically did it is because he wanted actors to know no matter what, he's like, if you do a bunch of take after take, the actors lose momentum and they get a little bit soft because they're not on their toes because they think, well, why do I want to give it my all? We're going to do 15 takes. Yeah. I don't want to give it everything and then have like these next 5 takes not even make it into the film. So when they were shooting with him, they knew like there's, a pretty good chance we're going to do 1 to 3 takes and one of these, so you got to bring it every single time because we're going to move on. And he said that was a way to kind of keep the actors on their toes, to keep the momentum up. And I just think that's a very like smart and direct, it's like such a director thing to do, like a very, concise way to like approach how to motivate an actor and how to say, let's not kill it. And, and there's directors who like Stanley Kubrick who are like 100 takes of someone walking through a door or something, or just doing, take after take. And I do find that in Stanley Kubrick films, some of the acting can be a little bit robotic and kind of cold. Whereas like a movie, this very much every moment that an actor's on screen, they seem like out of breath or it's just like a very frantic, fast-paced acting style that I think, is due to John Boorman's style of saying, like bring it every single take, like there's only going to be a few takes and this is it, so make it count.
And while that is a really economical and smart way to shoot a movie, at least I feel like it is, it's also for a movie like this, it feels necessary.
Yeah, and it is definitely something that's more conventional for like low budget filmmaking, of course, like you said, less film you're shooting, less time of the day that's taking to do one scene. But I do like his approach of, this, sort of
do
like
it right,
tricking the actors and, like getting the actors pumped up.
We both know you can do this. All right. Just focus and let's get it done and move on.
So I didn't want to, open the discussion of Deliverance on the notorious rape scene, but it seems appropriate. We'll just end the discussion on it. The final thing you hear about Deliverance.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, because it is, it is what people remember about this movie. And like we were saying before, there is so much more to this movie than the scene, but the scene is important for a lot of reasons.
I think the biggest thing to kind of right away say is that it's something that sadly has to be said in today's, even today, like 47 years later, that rape is rape. Yeah. And that this has always been kind of said as like the male rape movie. As if there's a huge difference. And how like this movie scares guys off so much, like, oh, I can't watch this one, but so many movies of the 70s, 80s, depicted the rape of women, and a lot of those movies are almost celebrated for their violence and brutality, namely Clockwork Orange or Last House on the Left. And those movies,
like, people cheer sometimes.
Yeah. And also, this is another film where the rapist is immediately killed, like justice is immediately done.
Which, when does that ever happen when a woman is raped in a movie? Hardly ever. I mean, out of the 3 billion times that women are raped in movies, that maybe happens once or twice.
And and not to pick on a movie like Last House on the Left, and I'm
which was Wes Craven's
first film, and I'm the movies we've done on this podcast, we're fans of the horror genre.
We love horror movies.
I love a lot of exploitation films,
boobs and blood.
But
it's a horror.
But I
horror
do,
thing.
and again, I'm not picking on Last House on the Left, but Last House on the Left is not the most well-made film. It's not the most well-crafted film. It's not the most well-acted movie, but it's a movie that people watch because what it is notorious for and what it's celebrated for is its brutality. And to me, the rape scene in Last House on the Left is very difficult to watch and much worse than the rape scene in Deliverance. But Deliverance, a movie that's really
all rape is bad, but brutality-wise.
But Deliverance is a movie that's super well crafted, really well acted, really well written. Is difficult to watch the entire movie because of this one scene. Because it's a guy getting raped and not a female. I
was gonna say that's the nut of it, but maybe that's a bad euphemism there.
It took me a second.
This rape that happens is kind of the catalyst for everything that happens in the movie. And kind of going off what you're saying with Last House on the Left, like one of the hardest movies for me to watch, but I actually like it as a movie. We haven't really talked about this before, but I Spit on Your Grave, like that's a pretty legendary film, but like that movie is about, I mean, there's a lot of raping in that movie. Compared to Deliverance, there are just so many more brutal movies that have depicted a rape scene, and I can't help but like marvel at the double standard of it being so it's just such an awful scene in Deliverance, and it just kind of like one guy said to John Boorman, I went to see Deliverance and about halfway through, and the rape's about like 45 minutes in, which is about halfway, and about halfway in I walked out and I've never been back to the cinema since. Like, really? Is it that dramatic?
And I'm sure that guy's never walked out of many movies where women had been raped.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
It's almost just such a thing that is not typical, but we're not exactly, even now, we're not shocked by rape of a woman in a movie if it fits into the story for whatever reason. It's not shocking. And I think too, and I'm very thankful to the actors of Deliverance that they say that anytime that the scene's talked about, they always make it a point to say that women got this before men did. Yes, this is the rape of a man in this movie, but I guess the point is that no matter if you're male, female, non-binary, whoever, a human, just a human, recognizing that rape is rape, and that it doesn't make this movie any worse or should put some dark cloud over it because of that, more than any other movie that also has rape in it.
I do think that James Dickey had to be aware of that, how it would affect the male psyche, and because how much of this movie is about being a man and masculinity and being a dominant figure, and then this demasculating scene, this humiliating scene, it is effective. And what I mean, clearly worked because of the of how many men are
have a reaction.
This is like a sort of a revered movie for them to have to sit through. So I think that he was definitely tapping into something. He knew what he was doing, or he knew the effect that it would have.
Yeah, exactly. And also along with that too, like the metaphors in this movie are not heavily masked really at all, but the idea of nature being raped, and because like this movie starts out, we're told in like the first couple seconds that the reason that they're going canoeing is because this river is going to be obliterated, And in essence, I would assume too that the tiny little shanty town that the guys roll into, that like all of this is gonna.
Well, because we can even see they're moving the church, they're like moving the town.
Yeah.
And then there's the people at the end. You see that family. It's packed up and they have all their belongings in the truck.
So this idea of man raping land is kind of all throughout and all mixed into this, and it's not a veiled metaphor at all.
Yeah.
So rape kind of serves as a few different purposes in this movie, and is really the catalyst for this. Like, there might be that giant story over this giant metaphor, but the actual rape of Ned Beatty's character is the catalyst for everything. All the decisions that these guys are going to make moving forward, and everything that happens in this movie is because of what happened in that moment and how they chose to deal with it.
Again, I think if one thing that we can pull from this discussion on the rape in the movie is if that's one thing that's apprehended you from watching a movie or revisiting it, but you've been able to sit through a multitude of films with no problem where women are being raped. It's like kind of like think about that.
Just
and
put it in perspective.
Don't miss. Yeah, put it in perspective, and then don't miss out on a really like brilliantly made movie, because kind of going back to the double standard that you mentioned, and
also let it serve as a purpose to think about something from a different point of view.
Yeah. And it was something that really like immediately hit me. Like as soon as we were like, we're going to talk about this movie, it's like, whoa, like,
you want to talk about that?
Because as soon as I even mentioned to people like we're doing Deliverance, it's like
every single person brings it up
immediately.
Yeah. I asked a guy I work with if he'd seen Deliverance, and he was like, yeah, that's a great friggin' movie. I love it. And I was like, what do you love about it? And this guy's, former military, like he's man's man. And he's like, man, it's a great outdoors movie. It's an adventure movie. It's just really good. I mean, I don't really like that rape scene, but I mean, like you can't help but bring it up.
Yeah, and by no means are we saying that it's not an awful, terrible scene, because it's an absolutely brutal scene to watch.
We're just saying.
I'm not saying it's an easy watch. We're just saying comparatively.
Yeah, and that it's the fact that it's a man. Yeah, that's the problem. Is what we're saying.
We're saying if it was 4 women, and if this movie was just 4 women on a camping trip and one of them was raped, most people they'd just never be like, man, that rape scene, I couldn't get past it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like if somebody got raped in The Descent, they wouldn't be talking about that rape scene at all.
No. Well, let's stop talking about rape.
Yeah.
Let's move on to our picks of the week.
Yeah, Justin, I cannot wait to hear about Zardoz. I should have seen this movie in life, but it was not familiar to me. You sent me the trailer for it, and I was hooked. Please tell us about it.
I'm gonna try my best. This could be.
You can sum it up.
This could be a little difficult, but I'm gonna give it my best shot here. After the success of Deliverance, John Boorman kind of had his pick of some high-profile projects, and so he was set to direct a sort of like big-budget adaptation of The Lord of the Rings, and Warner Brothers. I don't know if it was like budgetary reasons or whatever, but that kind of fell through. But John Boorman was then sort of stuck on this idea of doing a movie that sort of took place in like different worlds and was kind of like this like magical intertwined story, like science fiction, fantasy. And because he had such a success with Deliverance, the studio was sort of like, if it's low budget, you can kind of do whatever you want. So he wrote, produced, and directed Zardoz, which is it's kind of a movie. It's like off the rails. This is one that I saw in like a clip reel. The fact that this is a back-to-back follow-up to Deliverance is it's just kind of insane to me, because Zardoz is so out there. But anyway, best that I can give a short description of what this movie is about. It takes place in far, far distant future of 2293, and at this point the world is basically split into 2 sections. There's the Eternals, who live in like a lush area called the Vortex, and they are immortal. Like they're gonna live forever, and what keeps them living is basically sort of this like Google type search engine. It's like this computer voice that like gives them all this information. They can ask it all these questions, and it helps provide them with all this information and helps supply them in some way with being able to carry on forever. But they're pretty much bored because they're going to live forever. And actually the idea of death is like quite exciting to a lot of them. So those are the Eternals. Then there's the Mortals, who are the Brutals, and they live in sort of this just like almost like post-apocalyptic setting. Killing is nothing to them. And then there's actually like there's these brutal exterminators. They are sort of even more savage, and so they kind of like kill other brutals, other people that and basically this is like the science fiction of where you have the rich and the poor, the social commentary here. There's this really weird rock formation that floats in the air that has this voice speaking, and it goes by the name of Zardos. Well, it takes crops from the brutals, and they're basically paying tribute to these immortal beings, the Eternals, but it supplies them with guns. So it weirdly spits out all these guns that they use to kill. They have the exterminators use to kill some of the other brutals. It's pretty wacky. But anyway, Sean Connery is one of the exterminators. He gets on board this weird rock formation spaceship and ultimately kills the guy who's the voice of Zardos. And he ends up going into the vortex, which is the world that the Eternals live in. And immediately they're fascinated with him. Some people like him and some people don't. But they have, come to find out, they have all these powers like mind control. They immediately sort of make him their like servant. And so he's kind of like the servant to this one of the main people that are higher up in this world. And then there's another woman who's higher up, and she kind of wants him dead. And then there's another higher up that kind of wants to experiment on him because they're finding out that he's smarter than they thought for like, one of these people that lives, in this sort of savage land. Sean Connery comes to find out the idea for the Zardos was from the readings of the Wizard of Oz. And so actually Zardos is taken, like, it takes part of Wizard and part of Oz. And that's what he named his being after. And the same thing is like he was just a man behind the rock formation. He was doing the voice and making all these people realize that he was this big mythical creature when he was just a man who was able to be killed by Sean Connery. So this kind of angers Sean Connery. A bunch of weird stuff kind of happens. The Immortals, a lot of them want death, so there's this big brutal kill scene that happens. Eventually Sean Connery ends up with one of the Immortals who then becomes immortal. And the last 3 or 4 minutes of this movie is just kind of weird. It's like them having a kid and this sort of like time lapse of them growing older and slowly turning into bones. The movie is very weird. The studio kind of thought the movie was so incoherent that they made John Boorman shoot this very strange guy who plays Zardos narrating what the whole movie is about. And to be honest, without that intro for me, I don't know that I would be able to like kind of like get everything that's happening. There's still some things that I'm not exactly sure what the hell is going on, but I'll say this, it's crazy to me that this movie was made for like, it was again a low budget movie made for like $1.5 million. Even for 1974, I find it hard to believe because there's so many visual, there's so much production design. It really is like kind of a feast for the eyes. Even if can come off as like overindulgent of a director, he certainly creates this like fascinating visual world. And to me, all the way down to like the costumes, Sean Connery wearing basically like what looks like sort of like red diapers and like strange cloth overalls. Just YouTube the trailer for this. If the trailer for this turns you off, you probably definitely aren't going to be down for the 1 hour and 40-minute ride. But if the trailer even excites you in the least bit, I can guarantee that you're gonna really have a good time.
It sounds like such an involved movie, but just really out there, and I would really want to investigate this one.
And if you're a super fan of the movie, I'm sorry if I totally butchered that presentation of what's going on, but I just didn't know if I could be able to really like shortly condense like what is happening.
It sounds like there's a lot going on. I was not seeing the Wizard of Oz angle coming out.
It's definitely one of those movies where like everything has its own name. Like the vortex, the immortals, the tabernacle, like everything's got
its own world. Yeah. That's cool though.
Yeah. It's definitely original. I mean, it's not all the way coherent, I don't think, but it's definitely original. So your pick of the week was also a Burt Reynolds movie.
Yes, it was. It's called The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. And if possible, please don't be immediately put off by the title, because saying whorehouse is just as cringeworthy now as it was when this movie came out in 1982. Now, I grew up with the music from this movie's star, Dolly Parton. She plays a LaGrange, Texas madam who runs a brothel nicknamed the Chicken Ranch, nicknamed because when visitors couldn't afford to pay for services, they'd trade up for one live chicken. Burt Reynolds plays the town sheriff who, along with much of the Texas town the Chicken Ranch is in, defends the brothel and supports its existence in the community. You throw in a muckraking, slanderous TV journalist played by Dom DeLuise, looking to expose the Chicken Ranch to the masses, and well, you've got a recipe for a musical comedy about puritanical beliefs of decency versus the fight for prostitution not to be persecuted. The movie doesn't much linger on the legal side of this. It's more about how a media outlet wages war on a lady-owned business which legally employs all these tax-paying, giving back to the community ladies with hearts of gold who are just doing their job. I know musicals can sometimes be an immediate turnoff for some folks, but this genre, still does persist today, like La La Land or Mamma Mia or what have you. The list goes on. I love theater, musicals, live action, anything. I'm generally a fan. Best Little Whorehouse ended up being the 4th highest grossing musical comedy in the 80s, and it remains hovering around number 18 for highest grossing musical films since 74. And in the summer of 82, it was the movie that knocked E.T. out of the number 1 spot. It was after a month, but still. The draw to this movie is the on-screen chemistry between Parton and Reynolds. The film adaptation of the Best Little Whorehouse stage play was very much a vehicle for both stars. Like in the play, the town sheriff and the Chicken Ranch madam had an affair many years prior to the main point of this story. And in the film version, they've had this ongoing secret relationship for many years, but are unable to admit how in love they truly are with each other. And I've always found their chemistry in this movie to be so intoxicating, which is kind of ironic because there were all these rumors that Burt and Dolly did not get along during filming. And if that's true, this movie is definitely proof of how pro both these performers have always been, because it really does not come through on screen at all. If you're a fan of Dolly Parton, I'm sure you know this movie. There's a shortened version of her epic heartstopper, I Will Always Love You, that pops up towards the end and can certainly jerk some tears, as it does anytime it comes on. But whenever the group rendition of Parton's Hard Candy Christmas is sung as an ensemble with all of the Chicken Ranch women as they're moving out of the brothel after being closed, I ugly cry, like Claire Danes style ugly cry. It's bad, but it's a beautiful scene. There were a handful of other songs that were either written by Dolly or were in the original stage production that were cut out of the theatrical release due to time. It kind of makes me want to see the stage production of this if it were ever to come back around. But one of the most heartbreaking things about the story of the Chicken Ranch is that, only with Hollywood's finessing, this is a true story. Even the part about trading services for chickens, that actually happened. There really was a Chicken Ranch boarding house brothel that was accepted by a town and allowed to operate. In reality, though, the madam in charge doubled for a police informant by narking on anyone who came through the house and bragged about any crimes that they had committed. They were all law-abiding, tax-paying citizens who contributed to the community and even donated to local community organizations. And in the end, it really was a TV journalist who made a giant public stink, which resulted in the closing of the Chicken Ranch. And about 25 years later, that journalist admitted he was put up to it by the office of the Texas Attorney General, and it was just this personal targeting of the boarding house because he just didn't like what was going on down there. But they never proved that anything illegal was actually happening at the Chicken Ranch. Needless to say, the Hollywood happy ending to Best Little Whorehouse was not the actual reality. This movie, for me, is a charming romantic comedy. We all know I'm a sucker for that. But it does have a heartbreaking truth behind it. Even how Reynolds' sheriff character goes to meet with the state's governor in the movie, the real-life sheriff tried to do the same thing, except in reality, the governor refused to meet with him. Overall, I find this movie to be very woman-positive, sex-positive, all throughout. Personally, I don't think you need to like musicals to be into this movie. And even with the territory that Best Little Whorehouse dives into, it still remains very cute and fun to me. I'm also really charmed by Dolly Parton, who has a lot of great lines in this movie. Justin, you've probably seen this, right? I think your wife, Mary, revisited this and had a good time with it.
Yeah, this is one I saw much later in life because when I was a kid, I grew up on country music and I enjoyed Dolly Parton's music. But early in my childhood, I saw the movie Rhinestone, which I didn't like at all.
Yeah.
And then I kind of like Best Little Whorehouse in Texas was like a movie that I always thought that they were like hand in hand. They came out around the same time and were both musicals. And so I really didn't ever give Best Little Whorehouse like a look until like probably like well after high school.
No.
But a much better film than Rhinestone. I mean, not to knock Rhinestone, but it's.
Dolly Parton's still charming in anything she does.
She is, and she makes up for the woodenness of Sylvester Stallone, who really great in some movies, but man, not so great in
Rhinestone is something else.
It's unique. I mean, it's unique to watch it now, but growing up when I was a kid, it was like, man, this is not for me.
Yeah, Best Little Whorehouse is not Rhinestone.
Well, thanks for that pick of the week.
Of course.
And nice tie-in, Burt Reynolds.
Yeah, I cannot wait to watch Zardoz.
Well, I got it right there for you. Take it home with you tonight.
We'll see if I can manage to watch it tonight.
Let's keep on trucking. Here's your Murray moment.
Chicks dig me because I rarely wear underwear, and when I do, it's usually something unusual.
I think I need a root canal. I'm sure I need a long, slow root canal.
You gonna come and shake my monkey tree again?
Oh, what does that old queen know? She didn't even show.
Hey, this is so scrumptious. Is this hand shucked?
The flowing robes, the grace, all striking.
That was fun.
So this Murray moment was almost about the time Billy was part of a terribly unfunny SNL skit called Deliverance 2, which actually did feature Burt Reynolds. It's in season 5 if you want to check it out, but I just couldn't bring myself to talk about its offensiveness, especially after coming across this little story out of St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin, and a special pop-in at Eric's Canoe and Kayak rental off the beautifully scenic St. Croix River. We've all heard about Billy's karaoke sessions, how he's a welcomed party crasher, was in a stranger's wedding photo, even stealing somebody's French fry. There's a billion stories out there. Hell, there's even a documentary called The Bill Murray Stories. But here's one I hadn't heard, and I was lucky enough to talk to the man who had his own personal Murray moment back in 2009. Owner of Eric's Canoe and Kayak rental, Eric Flynn, was just living his life, grabbing some things at the local Walmart, planning to head back to home base as this was in the middle of the busy river season, just about mid-June. He got a text from one of his employees back at the kayak rental that just said, "Bill's here." Not really understanding who Bill was, Eric responded something like, "Great. Get Bill suited up and ready to go. We'll take care of him." A proper response from a 18-year veteran of the canoeing customer service industry. But he didn't really understand who Bill was. "No, you don't understand. Bill Murray is here," is the response text he got back. Eric told me that he just dropped his groceries right there and ran as quickly as he could out of the store, telling the kid on the other end of the text, "I'll be right there." Now, Eric's fairly certain it was Bill's wife at the time who made the reservation, so she must have really not made a big deal about it. Honestly, I'm surprised there was a reservation at all. Billy arrived with a few of his younger kids and Mike Veck, co-owner of the St. Paul Saints, a team for which Billy is also a silent partner. Eric said Billy was standoffish at first, and what kind of you would imagine a celebrity would be like when they're putting their safety and transport into the hands of a stranger with a van and canoes. Eric was in charge of transporting the Murray crew to the river access point, then picking them up later about 8 miles down the St. Croix River. If you've ever been in a canoe or kayak transport van, generally you spend a good amount of time in there. You chat it up with whomever's driving or other folks in the van. Eric was lucky enough to do just that. He said Billy finally loosened up after just a short amount of time. They talked baseball, movies, Billy even asked him about the canoe business, and so on. For Eric, who was totally a Bill Murray fan, he said he ended up being just like any other normal guy. He said, "He's a smartass, no doubt about that, but he's really intelligent and witty. I kind of forgot he was a famous person, though." He said Billy was a typical dad, kind of chasing after his teen kids. One in particular was giving him trouble that day specifically, being a typical teenager, Eric said. It may have seemed like Billy and Mike Veck were more of the outdoorsy kind and kind of into the canoe trip more than Billy's kids. Another gem I mined out of our conversation was Eric recounting an example of just how much of a smartass Billy can be. So the van's heading into the St. Croix Park and had to check in with the teen girls who were running the booth at the park entrance. Eric does this multiple times a day. He knows these girls, but today was different. From the van window, Eric says to them, "You know who this guy is?" and gestures back to Billy. The girls are like, "Yeah, sure. Yeah, you look really familiar." And Billy extends his hand and says, "Hi, I'm Eddie Murphy." And the girls are like, "Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, you're Eddie Murphy." And you better believe that Eric got a photo out of this experience, too. As his favorite Billy movie is What About Bob, he grabbed an orange life vest and asked Billy to wear it as Bob did in the movie. Billy was pleased to oblige, and this photo is perfect for any Bill Murray fan. Eric never tires of talking about this experience. And since this is a widely known story around the Wisconsin area, people ask him about it all the time. He said that one of the coolest things, though, is running into people with their own Murray moments. He even told me that he met the lady who had her french fries stolen by Billy while saying, "No one's ever going to believe you." So I guess this story gives me hope that maybe I'll run into Billy one day. And this story in particular, out in the woods and running into Bill Murray, well, man, that kind of sounds like a dream. So thanks, Eric, for sharing your experience with me. I really appreciate it. And you better believe if I'm up in the St. Croix Falls area, I'm stopping by your kayak rental. Or hey, even better, Bill, if you're listening, you want to go back to Eric's and take a canoe trip with me sometime? You know, I can't help to put it out there, right? I mean, what can that hurt?
Nice work connecting a canoe trip to Deliverance.
Yeah.
That was a good one. And that was more of like a story too.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
Yeah.
So did you talk to the guy?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I found one article. I tried to find a little bit more, but I could only find like one piece that was written in a local write-up on it. And then I
where did you talk to him? Were you at the canoe place or?
No, I just I found the article and I couldn't find anything more. So I'm like, I can just call this guy, can't I?
Okay.
So I just gave him a call and yeah, he just talked to me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Did you do that this week or was this a while back?
No, this was like last week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. He was really nice.
Way to go the extra mile on this Murray moment.
I didn't go all the way to Wisconsin. That would have been a few
that's
extra
why
miles.
I was confused for a second. I didn't know if like you meant like this was back when you
went up there one time.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I just called Eric.
Wow, nice.
Yeah.
Good investigative journalism.
I clocked some investigative time.
Yeah.
In my day.
Well, that's your Murray moments. Was there anything else that we wanted to wrap up with Deliverance?
Oh, one fun fact that we left out. So the other legendary scene with the banjo picking scene with Ronny Cox and the kid.
Right, yeah.
One thing that is pretty cool, and it's not, I think it was a fact that was hidden when the movie came out, but not so much now, is that the kid that's playing the banjo with Ronny Cox, those are not his arms. He's not actually playing that.
He's not actually playing it. Another fun fact about that guy is that he was also used in Big Fish much later, Tim Burton's Big Fish.
Was he?
As a quick banjo playing guy.
Huh.
and that. So
wait, the hands or the kid,
the
actor?
kid the actor that's in Deliverance, as a adult,
And he was actually playing banjo?
I don't know if he was actually playing in Big Fish, but he is playing a banjo in Big Fish. But Tim Burton, I think, liked.
Yeah.
He was like one of those weird Tim Burton things. Like, I'm going to track down the guy that was in this movie like a million years ago and put him in like a 30-second clip of my movie.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. But, I guess, including that guy, a lot of the extras or, people that are in the movies outside of the four main actors were locals of the area.
The dance that the old man does, that was improvised.
Banjos, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty unique. Like it's cool that they went for like a real authentic look.
Yeah.
It definitely paid off. Well, we hope you enjoyed. We went into some darker moments in this podcast, but we hope you enjoyed.
You don't watch Deliverance with the hope of coming out of it feeling great about life.
Right. Yeah, we went into some darker elements with this episode, but we hope it was worth it.
Oh, one more fun fact.
Yeah.
The hand that the final scene of the movie is a hand coming up out of the water, which is like the water is supposed to like represent subconscious, and this hand is what's always going to plague these men, like is the body's going to be found. Yeah, that hand is a hand, but it's a hand with a rubber glove on it with water inside.
And that was
that's why it looks so weird.
John Boorman does that same thing in Zardoz with Sean Connery. It's early in the movie, his hand pops up out of a thing, and then he pops up out. But
and Excalibur too.
Yeah, and many Brian De Palma said the end of Carrie was an homage to
That's
Deliverance.
right. Yeah.
And they used it in Friday the 13th, kind of borrowed only the whole body comes out, but
Deliverance just influencing so much.
Great film.
Yeah.
So we figured to lighten things up a little bit, we're coming out of Deliverance.
The furthest away that we could probably get.
We need to lighten it up for the next episode. So next episode, we're doing, and I can't believe we haven't done an Eddie Murphy movie.
How many times have we talked about Eddie Murphy?
We've talked about Eddie Murphy so many times. Yeah. So I'm so happy we're doing, and this is my favorite Eddie Murphy movie. Next episode, we're doing Coming to America, which I think is like a classic comedy, John Landis comedy, one of Eddie Murphy's best.
You and I have talked about doing this for a second, just getting around to it.
So much to talk about with Coming to America, so that'll be next episode.
That movie, there's so much creativity thrown into that movie. It's crazy. I can't wait to dive into it.
It's going to be a fun one.
Yeah.
If you want to contact us about anything, give us your thoughts on Deliverance. Tell us we're completely crazy about our discussions. You can reach us at don'tpushpausePodcast@gmail.com. We're pretty active on Instagram, Don't Push Pause Podcast. Pretty active on Facebook, Don't Push Pause Podcast. We're also on Twitter.
I'm trying.
Yeah.
Still trying to keep up with that Twitter.
I appreciate it. And then you can always go to our website, don'tpushpausepodcast.com. If you listen to us on iTunes and you feel it worthy, give us a good rating, leave a comment. It always helps.
We love knowing that you're listening, that you like it, don't like it, anything.
Yeah. So, thanks so much. And until next time, I'm Justin Johnson.
And I'm Lindsay Reber.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.